intact. Instead, it ended up buried in a pit alongside domestic refuse, and it stayed there for roughly 1,700 years until a volunteer with a trowel found it in the last days of community dig. Here is what tend to get lost when people talk about these objects. They were not cheap, and they were not simple. To make a hollow, 12-faced bronze shape with small spheres soldered precisely onto each of the 20 vertices, a Roman craftsman needed real mastery of casting, controlling the temperature of the furnace, managing how the molten alloy filled every corner of the mold, and finishing the piece so the geometry actually closed up correctly. The Norton Disney dodecahedron, for reference, is made of a copper alloy roughly 75% copper, 7% tin, and 18% lead, cast solidly enough to survive intact for 17 centuries. This was not a trinket. It represented a genuine investment of material and craft. And yet, across more than 130 known examples, no two are alike. They vary in size, some small enough to fit in a palm, others, like the Norton Disney find, closer to 8 centimeters across. The diameters of the 12 holes differ from object to object, and often from face to face on the very same object. There is no standard weight, no standard measurement, no consistent ratio between the holes that would suggest a shared system of use. Whatever these were, they weren't mass-produced to a single specification the way military equipment or coinage was. For 2 centuries, researchers have tried to force these objects into a familiar category, and one by one, every theory has fallen apart. The candle holder theory seemed promising at first, since a few examples showed faint traces of wax, but the design argues against it. With open holes on every face, it could never hold melted wax in place, and none of the examples show the soot staining or heat discoloration you'd expect from repeated use near an open flame. Later assessments suggested any wax traces were more likely soil contamination than evidence of a lamp. The knitting tool theory got a burst of popularity when people online demonstrated that you could loop yarn around the knobs to produce a tube of fabric. It's a fun demonstration, but it doesn't match the archaeology. Roman textile work in this period relied on needle-based techniques, not this kind of frame knitting. And if these objects were handled daily as a fiber tool, you'd expect where patterns on the knobs and edges. That where simply isn't there. The surveying instrument and military rangefinder theories fail for more basic reason: standardization. Any tool used for measurement or targeting needs consistent, repeatable dimensions. The Romans already had a well-documented surveying tool, the groma, which appears in Roman texts and artwork, and even in the graves of surveyors, marked with inscribed memorial stones. The dodecahedron appears in none of those contexts, and its lack of uniform sizing makes it useless as a precision instrument. The coin gauge theory, the idea that the holes were used to check the diameter of Roman coins, runs into the same wall. The hole sizes vary too much, both across specimens and within a single object, to match any consistent set of Roman coin denominations. And the sundial theory fails on the simplest grounds of all. There's no gnomon, no hour markings, nothing that would let it function as a timekeeping device. Strip away every practical use, and you're left with an object that is expensive, skillfully made, geographically widespread, completely unmentioned in the historical record, and physically incapable of the ordinary jobs people have tried to assign it. At that point, the question archaeologists have increasingly had to ask isn't what did this do, but what kind of thing doesn't need to do anything, in the practical sense, to be worth making? If the object itself won't explain its purpose, its geography might. Plot every known dodecahedron find on a map of the Roman Empire, and a pattern jumps out immediately. These objects are absent from the Roman heartland. They don't appear in Italy. They're not found in Roman Spain, or in the wealthy eastern provinces like Syria or Egypt. You won't find them in the great Roman cities, or in the major provincial capitals of the south. Every single confirmed example comes from the northwestern edge of the empire, the regions that are now northern France, western Germany, the Low Countries, and Britain. For nearly 300 years, a small bronze object has been quietly breaking archaeology. It shows up in museum cases across Europe with a label that admits almost nothing: 12 pentagonal faces, a hollow core, circular holes of different sizes cut into every side, small knobs at each of the 20 corners where the faces meet. Roughly 130 of them have been pulled out of ground so far, and in every single case, the same problem repeats itself. Nobody, not one archaeologist, not one historian, not one Roman author from 2,000 years ago, can say with certainty what was for. That should not be possible. Rome was the most documented civilization of the ancient world. It kept records of grain shipments to frontier garrisons. It kept technical manuals for aqueduct engineering. It kept inventories of military equipment down to individual buckles. Writers like Pliny the Elder cataloged the natural world in obsessive detail, and Vitruvius wrote entire treatises on how ordinary tools and structures were built. If the Romans made something and used it, there's almost always a paper trail. And yet this object, this finely made, clearly expensive bronze polyhedron, appears nowhere. Not in a single surviving text. Not in a mural. Not in a mosaic. Not in a soldier's letter home. It simply does not exist in the written record, despite existing, physically, more than 130 times over. That absence is the first clue that something unusual is going on. And in the spring of 2023, a new discovery in the English countryside gave researchers the best chance in decades to finally understand why. Most Roman metal objects turn up the way you'd expect. A metal detectorist walking a field, a plow catching something in the topsoil, a riverbank eroding after a flood. This one was different. In June 2023, a small volunteer team from the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group, working alongside professional archaeologists from Allen Archaeology, was excavating a site near a known Roman villa in Lincolnshire, close to the old Fossway Road. It was the final trench of the season, open almost as an afterthought in the last few days of digging, inside what turned out to be a large Roman quarry pit. Later reused as a rubbish dump, one of the volunteers uncovered a dodecahedron. It was the 33rd example ever found in Britain and the first from the Midlands. But what made it remarkable wasn't just the number. It was a condition. The object was found essentially undamaged, with a smooth, well-preserved surface, sitting among broken pottery, roof tile fragments, animal bone, and a coin identifying a layer as no earlier than the late 3rd century. According to the excavation team, it is one of the largest and best-preserved examples ever recovered, a rare case where a dodecahedron wasn't found broken, melted down for scrap or scattered in fragments, but essentially whole. That matters more than it might seem to. Bronze in the Roman world was valuable. It got recycled constantly, melted down and recast into tools, fittings, weapons, whatever was needed next. An object is well made. Using this much material and this much skilled labor would normally have been reused rather than discarded. These were frontier provinces. There were also places where Roman administration sat, often uneasily, on top of long-standing Celtic and Gallic cultural and religious traditions that Roman law never fully absorbed or erased. Rome governed these regions, taxed them, garrisoned them, but it didn't necessarily convert the belief systems underneath. The distribution of the dodecahedron maps almost exactly onto that cultural boundary, the line between the administratively Roman world and the culturally mixed, only partially Romanized frontier. This is one of the reasons a leading scholarly interpretation today, cautious as it is, leans to a ritual or religious object rather than a practical tool. Staff at institutions that have displayed the Norton Disney dodecahedron, including the National Civil War Center in Newark, have been explicit about this. The object shows no signs of everyday use, doesn't appear in Roman texts or art, and its likeliest role, based on a range of theories that have survived scrutiny, is connected to ritual or spiritual practice rather than to any mechanical function. That's not a "we found the smoking gun" claim. It's closer to, after eliminating everything ordinary, what's left points toward the extraordinary. It would be easy at this point to reach for a dramatic reveal, a lab report, a hidden inscription, a forensic discovery that finally cracks the case wide open. And there's content out there online that claims exactly that. Leaked isotope analyses, traces of cremated human bone, secret museum removals in 2025. It's worth being straightforward about this. Those claims don't hold up. The actual excavation reports from a Norton Disney group describe the object being found among ordinary refuse. Broken pottery, roofing tile, animal bone, and a coin in a reused quarry pit. There is no published scientific analysis showing human remains inside the Norton Disney dodecahedron or any other example. and no verified museum has pulled a specimen from display over suppressed forensic finding. That might feel like an anticlimax, but it's actually the more unsettling fact. If you sit with it, this isn't a mystery that was solved and then covered up. It's a mystery that remains genuinely, currently unsolved by real archaeologists using real methods in real time. Nobody is hiding the answer. Nobody has the answer. More than 2 centuries of scholarship and the honest, official position of the institutions that study and display these objects is still, essentially, we don't know. That is rare. In a field that has decoded lost languages, reconstructed entire dead cities, and mapped the genetic ancestry of populations that vanished 3,000 years ago, a fist-sized bronze object from a well-documented empire has simply refused to explain itself. So, what are the leading, responsible theories today? Ritual object connected to local frontier religious practice is the strongest contender, supported mainly by the geography and by the total absence of practical wear or function. Some researchers have floated the idea that these were status objects, a way for a master craftsman to demonstrate skill, essentially a technical showpiece, which would help explain why no two are alike, and why some show more expert workmanship than others. Others have suggested a connection to divination or measurement of symbolic, rather than practical, kind, something used in a way that didn't require standardized dimensions because the object's power lay in its geometry itself, not in producing a repeatable measurement. None of these theories are proven. All of them are more consistent with the physical evidence than the older, everyday tool explanations that dominated the 20th century. And all of them lean into the same uncomfortable idea, that an object is costly, is skillfully made, and is widely distributed across the frontier provinces was never meant to do a job in the ordinary sense. It was meant to mean something. There's also a simpler, structural explanation for the silence in the Roman record, one that doesn't require conspiracy. Rome's administrative writing focused overwhelmingly on the state's own machinery, the military, taxation, engineering, law, local or regional folk religious practices among provincial populations, especially in frontier zones only loosely integrated into Roman civic life, were exactly the kind of thing Roman authors had little reason to document. Silence in Pliny or Vitruvius doesn't necessarily mean suppression. It may just mean the dodecahedron belonged to a world Roman writers weren't in the habit of describing at all, the world of provincial, non-elite, non-Roman religious life, which has left far fewer traces in every category of evidence. Not just this one. None of this makes the 2023 discovery any less important. It's one of the best preserved dodecahedra ever found, recovered under proper archaeological supervision with clear contextual dating, and has already reopened public interest in an object that spent decades sitting quietly and often unlabeled in storage. The British Museum, for instance, kept its own dodecahedron out of public display for years before finally exhibiting it in 2014. Not because of any hidden finding, but because a genuinely unexplained object doesn't fit neatly into a gallery built around confident historical narratives. Museums like clear answers. This object has never given them one. The Norton Disney dodecahedron has since traveled between the National Civil War Center in Newark, Lincoln Museum, and the University of Nottingham's Lakeside Art Center, drawing crowds specifically because of the mystery, not despite it. The excavation group behind the find has continued working the surrounding site, returning to Potter Hill in subsequent seasons to better understand the context the object came from, hoping that a fuller picture of the site, Roman quarrying, later reused as a dump, its relationship to a nearby villa, and the Fossway Road, might eventually say something about why an object as valuable ended up buried there at all. Maybe future excavation will find another dodecahedron in a context that finally makes the picture click into place. A temple site, a burial associated with known religious practice, an inscription nearby that names what these things were called. Until then, the honest answer is the one written on so many museum labels. Purpose unknown. That's not a failure of archaeology. It's a reminder of how much of the ancient world simply didn't survive in writing, how much of it lived in practice, in belief, in objects passed hand to hand in communities Rome ruled, but never fully wrote about. The Roman dodecahedron isn't disturbing because of some hidden forensic secret. It's disturbing in a quieter way. It's proof that an empire capable of recording almost everything still left entire categories of human life, belief, ritual, the private world of provincial communities on its frontier, almost completely undocumented. Somewhere in that silence is the real answer. We just haven't found it yet. If this is the kind of history that interests you, the parts that don't come with a tidy explanation, let me know in the comments which unsolved artifact you'd want covered next.